Well, let me ask you a question. If you know that God loves you, say amen. Amen. All right. And I think it's going to be important to remember because today we're going to enter into a new series and we're actually talking about seeing God. And part of seeing God, sometimes we run into some challenges where we have doubts. And I know that life brings about great perspectives that doubts can enter in, and we want to be very careful with that. Well, I want to just share with you, I want you to think about something just for a second. And life is filled with lots of things, correct? And if we're not careful, doubt can play a fairly large perspective in life. In fact, doubt can be one of those things that can really bring life to its knees if we're not careful. We know that we know what's needed for a joyful life. We know what's needed to have a Christ-filled life. But sometimes things happen in our life, or we get lost, or we get distracted, and doubts enter in. And if we're not careful, those doubts can overshadow the truth of which the things that we know. And I think sometimes we get to that place in our life where all of a sudden we're in the midst of a doubtful situation, and we actually think that there's light at the end of the tunnel. But guess what it is? It's an oncoming locomotive after us, ready to knock us down at the first perspective. You know, doubts can hide things from us. Doubts can kind of put your mind in a quandary. It can kind of set you off in a place that you don't want to go, because doubts can bring great havoc. Now, thinking today, there are actually a lot of things happening in the world today, happening in our life today, where we experience doubts. And for as many years as I can remember, our national economy is seeing a lot of red ink. For as long as I can remember, we are in a deficit spending economy. And I see in a way that is projected probably for the next 3 or 4 generations before we get out of that. That can bring doubts. There's other things that are happening that, you know, when we see CEOs of corporations earning princely salaries, and there are so many people who are out of work today, that can bring doubt. We look at some other occasions where good-meaning men, women, and young people are trying to get jobs, but yet there are no jobs that are out there. So that brings doubt into that particular perspective. And people who really want to find work are trying. And there are lots of doubts. You know, I think looking at all these doubts, there's one thing that I know for sure, and despite being the husband of Patty Martin, I don't have the power to solve those problems. And if you were to ask me, there's really nothing that I could do. But yet those problems are there, even on an international scale. If you look at what's happening in the international theater, North Korea just had its failed attempt of launching a missile that they said was going to project a satellite into space, and heaven knows what other goals and aspirations they might have with that, and that missile failed. We see challenges in Africa. We see problems all throughout the Middle East, and everywhere we look in the news and things that are happening, we realize that it's bringing about a lot of doubt. And despite wanting to be peace-loving, God-loving people, there are challenges that we see that even though peace being brought into the land is probably the greatest priority that can happen, there are many things that you and I, no matter how hard we try, we just can't do. Many have a pressing problem in their life that needs a serious attention, and some of us are going through some very difficult times in our lives right now where it's bringing doubt to us. And we're having a difficult time trying to reconcile that. And those doubts plague us and they bring us down. In fact, we get to a point in our life where we're so overridden with doubts and things that are there, we find it hard to see God, even though God promises that no matter where we turn, no matter where we look, no matter what we see, He is there. Doubts have that way of playing mind games. And it's in those moments when sometimes we feel we need God's presence the most, and we feel alone, that those doubts can overwhelm us. Sometimes you can look at something and you can look at it and see something that's really not there, or you can look at something that's so obvious that even looking at it you can't see what's really there. A couple of images I want to throw up here, and the first one is a particular word. Now, what is the word that you see? You see the word good. Now, if you look closely to that, even though you see the word good, what other word is inside of that? You see evil. You see in the whites where it's the EVIL. So even though those two words are there, at times we can only see one thing even though there's something else that's there. Now how about this next one? This one's been around a long time. Do you see the older woman in this portrait here? You see her mouth where it's red. You see her forlorn eye, her hair, and her long protruding nose. But if you take a look very closely at that and take a look to the left, it's actually a photograph of a young woman. You see the young woman in the picture as well. What is the eye of the old woman is the ear of the young woman. Look off to the left, you see her eyelash and her nose. And what is the nose of the old woman is actually the line of the jaw, and the red thing is something around. Do you see it? So there's two things that are there. So there's something that's before us, and we think we can see it, but we're not really sure that it's there, but it comes. Now here's the story that we're looking at this morning, and the story is that there are two guys who are on their way to Emmaus, which is a 7-mile journey from Jerusalem, and as they're journeying on this, they can't see Jesus even though he's right there. Even though Jesus is standing there, even though his presence is there, they can't see him. And they begin to have a discussion along the way. And before they meet Jesus, they're kind of doing what we call in the South shooting the breeze. They're chitty-chatting. And it's kind of like, you and I, when we chitty-chat with each other, like, hey, how's the weather? I don't know. Well, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And they're beginning to talk about just things that one would normally talk about. But looking closely at this text and what Luke writes here, is we understand that this conversation is actually more center-filled, more poignant than what meets the eye, that these disciples are actually talking about a very serious topic. And they're engaged in this particular topic, and they're trying to understand what's happened in the last couple of days. Let's kind of reverse the story for a second here. For many, 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 many generations, it had been promised, it had been prophesied, it had been told and passed down through many, 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 many generations that a Messiah would come. That this Messiah would come and lead the people of Israel out of their bondage. That this Messiah would be the way of salvation. And through all those generations, it had been prophesied, it had been proclaimed. And throughout all of those generations had seen false messiahs come. Those that had proclaimed to be the Messiah turned out not to be. And there began to be doubts that set in. Does this Messiah really exist? Now these two disciples that are walking along to Emmaus come to a great profound truth, and that profound truth is that as they were remembering about the many, 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 many generations that this Messiah coming into the world had been proclaimed, they had got to a point where they were beginning to wonder, was this Jesus really it? Was he really the Messiah? They had seen miracles. Blind people had gotten their sight. Mute people could speak. Deaf people could hear. Demons were cast out of those who were possessed. He had walked on water. He had talked about all sorts of things. Could this truly be? But now we become understanding the story. And the story is that as they're walking along to this road to Emmaus, it's not really as exciting as it could have been. Because now all of a sudden they're realizing that just 3 days prior, all of their hopes, all of their dreams, all of their promises had evaporated. And doubt began to set in because they had seen the one, the Messiah, the one that they thought proclaimed that Jesus is the Lord. He had been killed on a cross. His limp, death body had been pulled down from that cross, placed in an empty tomb. And now it was the third day, and they were on their way to Emmaus. All hope had been lost. Doubts began to set in, and the challenges that came from that. And one has to wonder at that particular perspective, were the disciples wondering that, God, this just is not fair. We thought, we believed, we had hopes, and now we doubt. And they're on this road, and they're looking for hope. You ever been there? You ever been in a place where you had doubts? Where something that you really wanted, something you believed in, something that you knew was the kernel of truth that you sought, that all of a sudden it disappeared, evaporated, was taken away, or did not end the way that you had hoped or thought. And doubts set in. Maybe the greatest dreams that you had, maybe the greatest desires, maybe the greatest aspirations, maybe even something upon your faith journey, and doubts had set in and rocked and shook you to the very core. that's exactly how these apostles felt. These disciples that were walking along on the journey to Emmaus. You know, you remind yourself when you're in these places of wondering and the dreams are shattered and you can't see God, and you begin to get to that place and you say that this is not what life should be. This is not what I believe God had created it to be. And would not God have wanted a greater blessing in my life? And you get to those places where you're wrestling with that and you're so focused on your own personal need that you can't see God in the midst of that. Or you're so down in despair, or you're at that place like these two disciples where you really feel that every hope that you had has now been lost and doubt rises up. You know, maybe you spend a lot of money on your kids' college education. And now that they've graduated, they can't find a job. And you're saying to yourself, this is not the way it's supposed to be. You were dating somebody that you thought was going to be the person you would spend the rest of your life with. And in the midst of dating that person, all of a sudden you're getting closer and closer to becoming the place where you will marry that person. And all of a sudden something out of left field comes and that whole relationship is called off. And you begin to ask God, does this mean that I'll be alone for the rest of my life? Maybe you took a vow in your marriage to be married until death do us part, and you parted before death came because of challenges in the marriage. And now you're a single mom or a single dad and you're wondering, can I really survive under these circumstances? Maybe you've retired and you had saved all of your money for retirement, and you and your spouse had made all these grand plans that once you retired you would travel. I mean, think about that. Many of you here today, you're thinking about traveling and doing things together. We've retired, we've made it, we've worked all of our life, and now we can spend time together. At that moment when you're ready to embark upon that journey and that dream in your life, you learn that your loved one has Alzheimer's. And you're beginning to wonder how much of all that we saved will need to be paid in order to care for the one that I love. Doubts. Life is all about things that don't turn out our way. And the more I read the Bible, the more I realize that the Bible does not guarantee that the things that we run into in life will always work out the way that we want. The Bible does not guarantee that the things that I hope will happen always will. But the Bible does guarantee one thing, that God promises to be with us. The Bible does not promise a Leave It to Beaver lifestyle. It doesn't say that we all will be like Ward and June Cleaver and have wonderful boys and everything together, but it says that there will be challenges and there will be times that you and I will face doubts in life. And the question is, will we see God in the midst of that? I mean, these two disciples here in Luke's Gospel of 24, they have to be thinking, we've put all of our eggs in this basket. We have thought that Jesus is the Messiah. We've put all of our eggs in the basket, and now he's dead. What are we going to do now? I want to take us back to verses 15 and 16. As they talked, they discussed these things with each other, and Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. Now, why was that? You know, why could they not see Jesus? Some scholars will debate back and forth that the resurrected body actually is different than the earthly body, and therefore it has changed just so enough that we won't be able to recognize that. Others say that it's a spiritual issue, that these disciples are so overcome with their heartfelt emotion of losing the one that they thought, that they just could not come to conclude that Jesus, in fact, was there. And later on, if we continue to read, Thomas, the disciple, has the same challenge. But they could not recognize him. And it begs the question, you know, for me and for you, are there times in our lives when we just can't recognize Jesus? He's there, he's before us, he's right in our midst, but because we are so overwhelmed with a circumstance, we have doubts that he is there. And we can't see him. We need the spiritual eyes. Let's go on with verses 17 and 18. He asked them, what are you discussing together as you walk along? And they stood still, their faces downcast. And we sense the despair that's coming here. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, are you only a visitor to Jerusalem, and do you not know the things that have happened in these last couple of days? You know, thinking about this, I kind of wonder what Jesus might have thought. I mean, here he is standing before the two disciples. This is the same day that the tomb was found empty. He's there, and over the next 40 days, he makes himself be revealed to over 500 people. And he's standing there in front of these two, and Cleopas said, "Are you some kind of stranger that you don't even know what's going on? Are you out of the loop? Do you not know what's going on? I mean, have you been living in a cave? Hey, stranger, you been living in a cave or something?" And can you imagine Jesus if he wanted to play a little game? Yeah, I actually have been for the last 3 days. But he listens. And here's how the story goes. I want to imagine that Jesus is there. I am not professing to say I know the mind of God. But what I'm doing is I'm hypothesizing of what it would have been like to have been there and Jesus to have just revealed it at that moment. Can you imagine standing there? Guys, it's really me. It's Jesus. Can't you see? Can't you tell? And they're scratching their heads and they're wondering. And all of a sudden he begins to kind of tell them, remember back on Thursday? We had that great meal. And then we went off to the garden and we were praying. And I told you guys to stay awake and you just couldn't stay awake. And I said, please stay awake, and you couldn't. And they came and they arrested me. And as they arrested me, all of you all scattered and you left because you were afraid of your own life. And they took me into custody and they tried me. And they found me guilty because I said I'm the Son of God. And then they whipped me and they beat me and they punished me to the point to where I became unconscious time after time and after time again. And then they made me carry my own cross to Golgotha. And as I carried that cross, it was a painful activity for me to do, but I did it for you. I did it because I could see your face, because I loved you. And as I was carrying that cross, I stumbled and I fell, and there were so many times that my body screamed at me to just stop what I was doing, but I was committed to be obedient. I stayed the course. I did exactly what the Father said. And I went on, step by step by step, to the cross. And then they got to the point where they pulled my arms outright and they put nails into my hands and they nailed my feet. And they put me up there. And I couldn't breathe. And I called out, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And it was agonizing and I was in pain, but I stayed the course. I did exactly as the Father said. He called me and created me to be obedient. And I was obedient because I love you. And then the time came. And I said, "Into your hands, Father, I commit my spirit." And I took my last breath and I gave up my spirit. And I remember that as I gave up my spirit, my body was taken down off of that cross, and Joseph gave me his tomb, and they put my body into his tomb, and they rolled the stone there, and I remember hearing crying and weeping, and people being so upset. And I began to wonder that maybe hope was lost, that's what they thought. They were beginning to doubt. But then, a couple of days into that, there was this earthquake and things began to shake. And all of a sudden there was a great rumbling, and the devil and I were fighting inside of that tomb. And I took him to the woodshed. And I told him, "You do not have dominion over my people." And the devil said, "I will control your people." And I said, "No, you will not, because in my pocket I hold the keys of heaven itself." And he looks at Cleopas and he looks at the disciple. In my imagination, that is. And he says, "You don't have to be imprisoned anymore. You can be free. Can you not see that it's me?" And we see some great things that begin to happen. And verse 19 takes us to that point where they say to the stranger that Jesus was a prophet. He was powerful in word and in deed. And what that says to me is that they knew that when Jesus showed up, great things happened. And whenever he spoke, great things happened. And Jesus was one that could change the world, and he began to do just that. That 20,000 ate because of a lunchbox from a little boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish. Blind were able to see. He turned water into wine. He raised his friend Lazarus from the dead because he was mighty in word and in deed. And we learn in verse 20 and 21, these 2 disciples began to continue to talk, and they say, the chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one, and he was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the 3rd day since all of this has taken place. You see the key words, we had hoped, which means they had doubt. They are on that journey to Emmaus. They are not aware that that tomb has already been discovered in the pre-dawn hours by Mary Magdalene, and that Peter and John were there. They were not aware of that. They are walking on their way to Emmaus, and they do not yet have that renowned hope. They still have the doubts that are there. How about you? Are you living in a season of doubt right now? Do you doubt yourself? Do you doubt those that love you? Do you doubt the existence of God? Are you so overwhelmed by all the things of the earth? Maybe like the apostles, you too are saying, I had hoped. I had hoped to get a tax refund this year, but I have to pay, and I don't have enough money in my bank account to pay the debt. I had hoped that I would go on and take a vacation, but my spouse has cancer. I had hoped that my spouse would apologize to me by the harsh words that they said, but it hasn't happened yet. I had hoped for a better paying career, but it still feels like I'm earning minimum wage. I had hoped I'd have enough money to pay my bills. I had hoped. You too have hoped. You and I have been exactly where these disciples have been. We had hoped for so much, and doubt creeps in. But let me tell you what the Bible says. The Bible says, and what I've learned from that is, when I fall into those trappings, and it's usually when I'm focusing self-centeredly upon my own need, upon my own desire, upon my own want, upon my own reflection, upon my own understanding, that when I get into that kind of groove, it's hard for me to see God, because it's all about me. And God says it's got to be bigger than that. It's got to be bigger about what it is that He has planned for you. You know, you had hoped. See what the Bible says. The Bible says that when you are at the highest point of your faith, when you're at the pinnacle of your faith, I am with you. When you are cheering and things are going well in your life, I am with you. When you are prospering beyond all belief, I am with you. When you're praying and you feel that your prayers are being answered, I am with you. When your loved one is healed and you're excited about that, I am with you. But when we turn the page, guess what else the Bible says? When you're down on your luck, I am with you. When you are doubtful, I am with you. When you are in pain, I am with you. When you cannot see the truth, I am with you. When you feel kicked to the curb, I am with you. When you feel like the whole world has turned its back on you, I am with you till the end of time. The disciples didn't recognize till it got to that point where this man joined them for dinner. They sat down at a table, representation of hospitality, and Jesus broke the bread. It was like a time warp, you know. Have you ever had those moments where all of a sudden something happens and your mind starts going backwards and you remember all these things? And it was like a time warp that took them back into the past, and they began to realize all the things that Christ had taught them, His presence, and all of a sudden it's like, it's Jesus! And He's gone. he disappears. You know, I know what it's like to kind of move through life thinking that you have strength, only to have a time in your life where doubts come. Many, many years ago, I went through a very deep bout with depression. And it was a time in my life where I really could not see the goodness that would come with life. It would be sunny outside, and I would say, no, it's cloudy and rainy. Someone would say, I love you, and I would say, only because you feel you have to. And whenever you're in depression, you kind of get to that state where it paralyzes you. You cannot make decisions. You certainly cannot pull yourself out of that. And so many times in depression, even in the Psalms and the lives of some of the prophets, we realize that you get down into that slimy pit, and it's so hard to get out. That's where I was. And at that point in time in my life, if somebody would have said to me, Bob, do you see God? I would have said, no, I don't. And I remember a phone call was made to a very dear friend of ours. And she came into the room where I was, and I was sitting on the edge of a seat, and I was weeping uncontrollably. And she came in, and she put her arms around me, and she embraced me. And I just wept and wept and wept. And I said, I just don't know where life is going. I don't know that I have the strength to get through this. And she reminded me of the story of Christ, how I was created in the image of God, how Christ himself had died for my sin, how he loved me, how the life that he had prepared for me was to prosper me, not to harm me. That God did not want me to live into a life of depression, but instead a life filled with joy. I didn't doubt after that day. I saw Jesus in her smiling face. I saw Jesus amidst her tears. I saw Jesus as I heard the words that she prayed. We see Jesus everywhere, folks. Look around the room, he's here. He's not to be missed. I see him in the smiling faces of my grandchildren. I see him in the love of my wife and the children that we had an awesome blessing to raise. I see Jesus and I see the presence of God in the movement of the life of this church as we are moving into a healthier basis. I see the face of God and the face of Christ in the aha moments when people accept him for the first time, as I saw at the fountain today. He's here. The question becomes, we've heard these stories in the Bible, but do we believe them? Are you ready to believe it or not? Stop your doubts. Open your eyes and see Jesus.